The house on Maple Street was supposed to be quiet. Sunlight on the hardwood, the old oak out front dropping leaves like confetti every fall. Ruby had grown up tracing the grooves in the banister with her finger, the staircase like a spine she could lean on. Her mother's laughter still seemed to live in the corners. After she died, the deed went to Ruby. David, her dad, made sure of it. It was the one thing he wouldn't let grief take. Then Sandra moved in. Sandra's smile was always a little too tight, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Her kids, James and Melissa, arrived with boxes and opinions. No chores, no rent. The dishwasher magically emptied itself. Laundry baskets disappeared and returned folded. Movies ran in the living room every night as if the house were an Airbnb they'd paid for, except they hadn't. At dinner, the week everything changed, Sandra plated pot roast like a queen doling out rations. Ruby took her seat in the chair that creaked. It had been her mother's favorite. The table hum was familiar. Cutlery, glasses, James narrating his video game feats, Melissa snapping photos of her meal. Sandra cleared her throat. "We need to talk." Ruby looked up. A small knot formed in her stomach. "Okay." "You're 20, an adult. We've been more than generous." Sandra's nails tapped the table. "It's time you start paying rent if you want to keep living here." The room stilled. James swallowed a mouthful so fast it hurt. Melissa's eyebrows shot up, amused at the show. Ruby blinked. "Rent?" She glanced at David. He stared at his plate as if it could offer him courage. Sandra leaned back in her chair. "Yes. You can't be a parasite in your own father's home. James and Melissa are in school. They're my responsibility. You, however, need to contribute," Ruby finished quietly. David finally found his voice. "Sandra, maybe we should—" Sandra cut him off without looking. "No, David, this is reasonable." Ruby set down her fork. That knot in her stomach loosened with something else, steady and cold. She stood, went to the hall closet, and pulled out a thin, fireproof folder. The kind that had lived under lock and key since the funeral. She laid it on the table like a card in a game no one realized they were playing. "If we're talking about rent," she said, "we should make sure we all know who owns the house." Sandra's laugh was small and brittle. "David owns the house, sweetheart." Ruby opened the folder. The deed lay inside, creased but intact. Her name stared up, stamped and official. She turned it slowly so everyone could see. "This is my house." James froze mid-reach for the breadbasket. Melissa's phone dropped into her lap with a soft thump. David's face blinked through surprise into a kind of relief he'd been holding so long he forgot what it felt like to let it go. Sandra didn't blink. "No, you're confused. David, tell her." Ruby took her phone out and called her dad. He was across the table, but she wanted it on record. She tapped the speaker button. His voice came through tinny, echoing in their sudden silence. "Dad," Ruby said calmly, "who owns the Maple Street house?" David cleared his throat. On the phone, his voice sounded steadier. "Ruby does. I put the deed in her name after your mother passed. It's what she wanted." "Why would you—" Sandra started, then stopped, swallowing the rest. "My mother paid the down payment," Ruby said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "She always said the house would be mine. Dad honored that. I've been letting everyone live here because it's home. Now you want me to pay rent, in my own house." The room froze, and in that silence, you could hear the radiator ticking. Sandra's smile vanished. She stared at the paper as if it were a magician's trick. Then she stood up so abruptly her chair squeaked, gathered the plates, and muttered something about dishes. Wrong move. The dishwasher was already running. The next morning, Ruby came down to a spread of college brochures arranged like a sales pitch. Out-of-state campuses with manicured lawns. A pamphlet half open to a page about fresh starts. Sandra sat poised at the table, coffee steaming. "I've been thinking," she said, voice smooth. "You deserve a college experience away from here. Independence. I called your guidance counselor. There's a great program 2 states over. We can help you pack." Ruby picked up a brochure and saw her own absence sketched between the lines. Empty room, one less voice, problem solved. She set it down carefully. "Thank you," Ruby said. "I'll think about college." But I've decided something else, too. Sandra's eyebrow twitched. Yes? New rule, Ruby said. Everyone pays rent. Melissa actually laughed. Like Monopoly money? No, Ruby said. Actual money. Real amounts based on the market, divided fairly. If you live here, you contribute. If you can't pay, we figure out work equivalencies. James looked panicked. Ruby, I can't. I have games and classes and chores you've avoided, Ruby said. She pulled a stack of printed documents from her bag and laid them out. Simple contracts. Clear dates, amounts, responsibilities. Signed at the bottom, Ruby Hart, owner. Sandra exhaled sharply, affronted and impressed. This is absurd. You can't. I can, Ruby said. It's my house. I've been covering utilities, groceries, repairs. I won't carry this alone anymore. Dad, she said, turning to David, your share is handled. You've already covered what needed covering. He looked at her, eyes glassy. Ruby, you raised me, she said. You kept the heat on after Mom died. You don't pay. The protests erupted. James threw his hands up. My paycheck's tied up in a new rig. It's essential. I stream. It's a job. Melissa flipped her hair. My dance classes aren't cheap. You can't expect me to just... Sandra's voice lowered into a warning. This is ridiculous. You can't force my children to sign something. David. Ruby slid a pen across the table. Not force. Offer. Live here, contribute fairly. Don't, and we reevaluate where you live. Choice. They signed. Not with joy, not even with grace, but with the pragmatism of people who suddenly realized the ground they stood on belonged to someone else. Months passed. Ruby kept a ledger pinned to the fridge, neat columns of names, dates, amounts. Rent day became a ritual of excuses. The bank app glitched. My transfer's pending. Venmo is down. I had a car repair. Dance recital fees this month. The festival had non-refundable tickets. My employer forgot to run payroll. Late fees accrued. Not massive, just enough to say, I saw that. Ruby's face stayed calm. Sandra's tightened. David cooked more on Sundays, his way of ladling love into a house that had become a negotiation table. Ruby fixed the water heater that rattled in winter. She patched a leak under the sink. She ordered a part for the dryer. She left receipts on the counter like breadcrumbs that led to reality. Sandra tried to maneuver. She suggested lowering Ruby's exorbitant expectations. She hinted at family discounts. She arranged a family meeting with a charade of concern, then complained about contributions rubbing everyone the wrong way. Ruby listened. She was done apologizing for taking care of what was hers. On the 1st of June, Ruby called a final meeting. No pot roast, just coffee. Sunlight like judgment across the table. She explained without theatrics. We agreed on rent. We agreed on dates. Repeatedly, it's late. James stared at his sneakers. Melissa picked at a thread on her sweater. Sandra's jaw clenched. Ruby held up the ledger. Dad is spared. That's not up for debate. She looked at David and he nodded, grateful and a little stunned. Sandra, James, Melissa, here's your choice going forward. She slid 2 options across the table. Option A, pay cash, on time, every month. Option B, pay with work at a fair, agreed-upon rate. Housekeeping, meal prep, lawn care, errands. A serious schedule. No performative wiping a counter and calling it a day. Sandra recoiled as if the paper were hot. Housekeeping? Paid work equivalency, Ruby said. If the money isn't there, we exchange value. I run the schedule. You clock the hours. Miss the hours, and it counts as unpaid rent. James blinked. So like professional chores? He didn't know whether to be offended or intrigued. Melissa whispered, Do we get, like, tips? Ruby almost smiled. You get living here. Shock rippled around the table. Then something complicated settled in. Pride battling reality. Entitlement wrestling with the word earn. Sandra stared down at the schedule. At Monday, kitchen deep clean. Tuesday, bathrooms. Wednesday, laundry and linens. Thursday, meal prep for the week. Friday, lawn and trash. Saturday, errands. Sunday, rest. The room waited. She had always considered herself above such work. She had always used the word housewife like it was a trap she'd escaped. But the ledger didn't care about feelings. Sandra lifted her chin, that tight smile nowhere to be found. "Fine," she said, voice clipped. "I choose work." James looked at Melissa. Melissa looked at Ruby. They scribbled their names in reluctant loops and slashes. The first week was rocky. Sandra attacked the oven like it had personally offended her. She learned the hard way that bleach and ammonia don't mix. Ruby created checklists. She taught Melissa how to fold fitted sheets, which felt like a magic trick. James mowed the lawn in crooked lines until Ruby showed him the pattern her dad had used for years. The second week, towels smelled better than they had since Ruby's mom. The kitchen gleamed. The trash went out without a fight. By the end of the month, the house had found a new rhythm. Rent arrived, sometimes in envelopes, sometimes measured in hours recorded on a clipboard. Meals were a shared project instead of a nightly performance. Ruby paid the utility bills without resentment and repaired the fence with James holding the post steady. Melissa learned to cook a sauce that didn't burn. Sandra stopped saying, "my kids," and started saying, "the kids." Peace returned, not like a sudden calm, but like a song they relearned slowly. Ruby walked past the oak in the front yard and thought, "this feels like ours again." Not because she surrendered her ownership, but because she enforced it without cruelty. The house breathed differently when everyone understood what kept it standing. One night, sitting on the porch under the porch light, David asked, "Was that justice, or did we go too far?" Ruby watched Sandra inside, laughing at a joke Melissa told while folding laundry. James came out with a lemonade and handed it to Ruby without being asked. She thought about the deed, the ledger, the conversations that had bruised and then healed. "It was what the house needed," she said softly. "Whether that's justice or too far depends on who's telling the story." And for the first time in a long time, Ruby felt like she was the one telling it.